everyone. This is update for February 8, 2025, day 1081 of the war and of the date update. I'm going to start with general strategic updates, and then I'm going to switch to situation on the battlefield in Ukraine. And I'm going to start with the US, as I think the most interesting events are unfolding in the US, whereas essentially new president Elon Musk are fighting against the bureaucratic class, and trying to to sort of gain control over bureaucratic class. So far, they were somewhat successful. I think the most successful part was dismantling of USAID, which was essentially sort of like a heart that was pumping finances to this bureaucratic state that was affecting pretty much most of the world. For example, in Ukraine, there are a lot of organizations that are going belly up right now because this funding has dried up. So the influence of this organization was very significant around the world, without any question, and it worked to essentially was sort of brain center and heart of the administrative state in the US. Now they switching to so that was a part of the financial flows that were sort of addressed, and the next step was to actually address cash flows that are going directly from the US Treasury Department. Or basically, this is kind of like a bank that, or probably better to say, debit or checking account where you have your money and where you running, wiring money for the entire country. And that was actually blocked by the judges in the US, which is obviously another level of confrontation with the administrative state that is happening in the US. It's unclear how it's going to unfold, but but both sides are on the collision course, let's put it this way. And in some ways, what new president and Elon Musk are attempting to do are truly revolutionary. Whether they're going to succeed, it's another question. But going actually to the success, it's probably going to be determined by economic success of the new administration. And so far, I don't think there is very clear, coherent strategic economic policy, because crippling administrative state, while it's really important, it does not produce enough economic surplus to address the problems and to address tremendous debt. It's probably going to stop the growth of the debt. But the problem is that the amount of damage that's sort of been done is also tremendous. And there's simply, so far, doesn't look like there is enough resources to sort of plug the hole that was created in sort of simple way. Because what this new administration is relying is on continuing the tax reductions that are set to expire at the end of 2025, but that's sort of, call it, baked in the cake. So it's already, that benefits already has been utilized. So there is no upside from there. Then the desire to produce more crude oil is also not a quick solution by any means, because this is a long-term business. Oil and gas is long-term business. It requires long-term investments. So in order to increase production, it probably will take 2-3 years to see some initial results, even in a shale, even with shale deposits. And there's a big question to what extent those shale deposits were exhausted already, because by their nature, they not long-lasting reserves. So that's in some ways, if you would sort of compare it or figuratively look at that, what they are is essentially uh, you basically cut the lemon and you squeeze the juice with the hand, and most of the juice is going to come out of lemon. And it doesn't require much sort of effort. You just squeeze with the hand, and that's sort of conventional crude oil, which was essentially squeezed to a significant extent from those oil fields. So what you do, the next step is you actually start to sort of put that lemon into sort of, I don't know how I call it, squeezer that essentially breaks the inside of the sort of soft part of the lemon, and you sort of get some little bit extra juice, and that's really essentially shale crude oil. So what this really means that this is that you're essentially scraping the bottom of the barrel. That's what really the shale crude oil, the meaning of it, so that you don't have that many reserves left. And again, going back, there's a big question whether it's going to be possible or not. Probably where U.S. administration can expand and sort of open up new areas for exploration, where there's going to be new finds, and that could be sort of solution. But again, that cannot sort of be effective in a year. It probably will take several years before any results. So that part of sort of solution is somewhat sort of, I would say, derailed. And so far, all of this cost savings from Doge, while again going back to this whole war against the administrative state, which is important, which is largely big part of the problem, but it's just not going to be enough to deal with the budget deficit in the U.S. It's just way too big, and the problem is that U.S. president made promises about sort of additional tax breaks, and those tax breaks are focused on reducing personal income tax. And for those who are long-term viewers, sometime I'm trying to do it monthly. I looked at the U.S. Governmental expenses and the revenues, and from you may notice that I mentioned many times that most of the revenue for the U.S. budget is coming from personal taxes. So basically, U.S. government is funded by personal taxes. It's not coming from the corporations. So people are really funding the U.S. government, and reducing tax base essentially creates even bigger hole. And the problem is that politically, the president already promised those things, and it would be, I would say, very damaging to back out from those promises, especially when you are fighting war against the administrative state, which is extremely ready to counterattack. It will be more than happy to see the vulnerability, and definitely would attack. So you kind of like becoming between a rock and a hard place, and remains to be seen what the solution is to this situation. In terms of the foreign activities, it's very clear that new administration was very successful at basically influencing Canada and Mexico to do what they want to do. A similar way, Panama. All those countries are extremely dependent on the US for their economic well-being, so it's not surprised that they caved in. Um, However, China is actually was someone who actually did not cave in at all, and it seems like that China is willing to go into the war of attrition with the U.S. And by war, I don't mean military war. So far, it's more economic, diplomatic war. China was extremely, I would say, upset, probably most diplomatic way to say it, uh, um, with the U.S. success with Panama, where Panama decided to exit Belt and Road Initiative. So essentially, it's Chinese new colonial system that they're building, and so obviously you that was important asset in that colonial system because it gives control over essentially logistics in Americas, and it was huge blow for China. China retaliated by actually doing sanctions and restrictions on supplying some strategic materials to the U.S. And then they just simply did not react to the sanctions. They did not cave in. And I just want to explain why it's happening. So if we look at Chinese exports and imports, as you can see, for 12 months, 1 to 12 means for the entire year. So 12 means December. So it's January through December. So the total export is roughly 3.6 trillion. The import is 2.6 trillion. So as you can see, China is highly profitable in terms of its external trade, and that's really the driver of Chinese economy at this point. This is what I've been mentioning for a while, that China is gonna sort of deal with its real estate disaster through external trade. Essentially, that would allows Chinese real estate collapse to be contained and Chinese financial system to be contained. And if we look at the place of the U.S. in exports, in Chinese exports, which is what brings profits or wealth to cover mistakes in internal policy, is really U.S. is not, well, it's really important. There's no question about it, but it's not sort of something that China cannot survive with. So if you see 3.6 trillion, US is 525 billion, so roughly 0.5 trillion. And obviously, China also realized that US simply cannot shut it off completely. So even, let's say, China is losing 100 billion here, it's not, or even 150, and truly US cannot shut down more than half of this, because it's going to become extremely painful consumer wise in the US, will sort of upset consumer internally in the US, and so there's relatively not that much leverage that US can do. And let's say you see here imports are 163 billion only from the US to China. So it's hugely profitable, as you can imagine. 524 minus 163, it's hugely profitable for China, more than like 300, probably roughly 50 billion plus for China. And even if US implements 10% tariff, which is what is happening, so that's reduction by 50 billion here, roughly. Right, so it's 450. You remove from 350, 50 billion, so it's still 300 billion, so still very profitable. At the same time, China also implemented tariffs and on the US, so this is gonna become even smaller. And from Chinese perspective, they they're not really dependent on U.S. import. It's really agricultural, oil and gas, and some machinery. But uh, oil and gas, they can always go to other countries, including Russia and then Persian Gulf, and then for agriculture can go to Brazil, can go to Russia, so that they have sort of resources, and then machinery they really don't really have a problem of sort of making their own. So the U.S. leverage is extremely limited with China, and that's why China is not sort of wavering, not changing its position. It keeps going its course. Um, and so this is going to be very difficult, I would say, for the U.S. in dealing with China. The other problem in the U.S. that's sort of appearing is actually that productivity is starting to go down. So the productivity for the fourth quarter of 24 was up only 1.2%. The prior number was 2.3%. And this is very related to the interest rates. So the U.S. central bank started reducing interest rates. I think it was like in July, the first cut was, but more was done in September, significant one. So that's having a negative effect general on the economy in the U.S. by actually reducing productivity. And so there's another sort of hard and was it rock and a hard place where in order to avoid financial problems in the U.S. system related to the real estate and banking system and general fiscal deficits, you kind of need to keep interest rates low. But then if you keep interest rates low, then productivity goes down, your GDP goes down, and so you squeeze from both sides. And the whole point I'm trying to make is that U.S. is going towards the point where this new administration will have to will be forced to make difficult decisions or painful decisions for the society, or it will fail very sort of in very sort of big way, and especially since it's fighting this administrative state, it will definitely jump on that opportunity to basically destroy this new administration. So that's why it's important what's going on in the U.S. because it's the fight is sort of just the beginning of of what's going to happen there. Actually, I want to mention about Russia. While we're looking at this, if you look at the situation between Russia and China, for the most part, China is really not increasing any imports from Russia. So even crude oil and agriculture, foodstuff, they're not increasing any imports from Russia. At the same time, Russia is definitely buying significant amount from China, as you can see. So in some ways, it's very, at least it looks like sort of one situation where China has upper actually hand over Russia. Let's put this way, at least based on the trade. If we look just purely from trade perspective. And in terms of Russia internal economy, the Russian industrial production is growing significantly. I think it was like 8.2% in December of 24. And what this really means is just the war economy, manufacturing of war material, meaning equipment, everything, is going up. This to extent is at odds with what's being observed in Russian propaganda machine, which is very clearly changing direction and sort of programming Russian society for peace, essentially. If I would just, the best way to describe it is now we need to have peace. Ukrainians are brothers and so on. At the same time, the war machine is still working. So, which means that decision about the peace is still sort of is not final. It's definitely there's definitely desire to have peace, and because Russia is bleeding as well tremendously from this invasion in Ukraine. At the same time, as I stated, the decision is not final, and we're gonna find out over coming months what's gonna happen. Situation in Ukraine is obviously much worse. It's, I guess, no surprise for anyone, because Ukraine is essentially totally dependent on financial help and to a great extent military help from US and from Europe. And definitely from US there is no financial help at this point. So, but Ukraine's still getting financial help from European Union, which kind of keeps it afloat at this point. But the pressure is significant on Ukrainian president, Ukrainian political class, to the point that they're sort of formally stating that they open to negotiations and so on. That's just really a reflection of the significant pressure that's being applied on Ukrainian political class. Even though it's very clear that population in Ukraine is not okay with losing territorial integrity, it's not being accepted by Ukrainian population, but political class has to sort of maneuver between external and internal pressure, which are going sort of at this point in opposite directions. One of the sort of the actions from Ukrainian political class is actually to reduce the drafting age from 25 to 18. This is actually what used to be a pressure point from the prior US administration, where they pressured to reduce drafting age to 18. Ukrainian political class was resistant to that because obviously it's not popular inside of the country. And now it seems that it's because the situation is becoming more desperate, they cannot rely on as much US help, so they decided to go for sort of human resources, for sort of call it using sort of say bodies instead of the machinery to plug the holes on the front line, which is obviously terrible, but I never said that political class in Ukraine is any good. And so that's again showing another level of desperation in Ukrainian political class at this point. And actually desperation gets to the point is that for the first time I would say for the first time actually since the beginning of the war, Ukrainian president had to appoint actually capable general to Pokrovsk to handle situation in Pokrovsk area, because I was discussing this extensively. The front line there was collapsing and was could lead to wholesale collapse of the front line in the whole area. And so this, so the Ukrainian president appointed this new general. His last name is Drapati, about 2 weeks ago, and I would say there is indication that he managed to at least stabilize front line in that area, and that goes back to the idea that a lot of problems of Ukrainian army are completely related to incompetence at the top military level in Ukrainian army, and that's really one of the main root causes of the problems there, along with similar incompetent political class. It's not a problem of lacking of equipment or lacking people and so on. People like ordinary soldiers are deserting because they don't want to serve or execute suicidal missions where they understand that doesn't make sense and there's no common sense in what they're being asked to do, because nobody there to simply sacrifice themselves. They're not kamikazes. They want to win, they want to fight, and they want to win. They want to be successful. And if you don't see that, then you obviously, you're not gonna kill yourself just because someone tells you. And that's hopefully makes sense. This very simple logic how things are working there on front line, and why there are a significant number of desertions. I think the latest number was close to 20,000 in December, which, as you can imagine, if you take it by the 12 months, it's roughly 240,000. That's roughly third, if not the maybe 25% of the army is deserting. That's obviously you have significant problem. That's not significant. I mean, I would say mortal problem if you have that situation and something is completely wrong with the how society functions. But now let's. I'm gonna do a walkthrough in a clockwise fashion, starting from very north, and we're gonna jump into the Kursk region of Russia, where Ukrainian forces actually attempted purely tactical attack to push a little bit Russian troops outside of southern outskirts of Sudja. So they attacked towards the direction of Cherkasska Konopelka, managed to actually regain some ground and basically pushed Russian troops a little bit further from Sudja, which again was done probably for political reasons. So that and I guess the political reason is the thinking that this is going to be negotiating leverage in negotiations with Russia, basically claiming that okay, we're going to leave Kursk region of Russia in return for some for Russia. In return for Russia actually returning Ukrainian territories, which I don't think is going to be any meaningful leverage, because it's really not critical for Russia at all. While those Ukraine captured territories are critical for Ukraine. Now let's move to situation south to area north and northeast of Kharkiv. Things here on pause, nothing major is going on. Now let's move again south-southeast and to North Lugansk front line. The sort of this whole sector is somewhat stable, but there are problems north of Kupiansk, where Russian troops are expanding their bridgehead around Dvorichna. Once it's becoming sort of more dangerous, I'll show on a separate map that situation there. Then if we move south to North Donbass front line, the northern part is completely quiet. The southern part is largely quiet, with exception of Chasiv Yar, where Ukrainian troops still managing to hold on to western outskirts of it. And also in Toretsk, Russian troops essentially captured most of the town. Again, Ukrainian troops are holding on to the western outskirts of Toretsk. Essentially, you can say that both towns are lost. It's just I'll call it agony. Now let's move to the central Donbass front line, where things used to be really bad. At this point, no major advances by Russian troops. So far, they are contained. I wouldn't say that this is sort of long-term or strategic containment. It's sort of more on tactical level. So Russian troops did not manage to advance in any meaningful way, especially in the Scotland and Udachne area. The fierce fighting is still going on. Doesn't mean that Russian side sort of gave up, stopped attacks. It's not the case. It's more that Ukrainian defense is becoming sort of more capable, and that's really what's going on. So there's fierce fighting going on for this village Udachne. Remains to be seen. Doesn't mean that, as I stated, things are not sort of strategically stable. At least they're not collapsing in sort of quick fashion. Let's put it this way. Similar situation south. The only sort of small update is Ukrainian troops nearly lost Dachne, and they essentially withdrawing. But as you can see from this whole the way the front line looks, there is no option for Ukrainian forces here. They really need to withdraw to this Constantinople Andriivka line, and actually at this point Russian troops control significant portions of Andriivka, so the front line is essentially going to be collapsing to this sort of line from going from them where I'm showing, basically with the red arrow, centered around Alexeivka and Bogatyr essentially. So that's where the front line is sort of moving next, but it's probably going to take a significant amount of time at the current pace. Now let's move to situation on the Zaporizhya front line. Things here are quiet, not much is going on here. And then the last section of the front line along the Dnipro River, things here are also quiet. No major action by Russian command here. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Till next time. Bye-bye.